with the obligation for Avram to circumcise himself and circumcise his children, his child, Yishmael, all the members, the male members of his household. And this was known as the covenant, the Holy Covenant. That through this, and because of this, the land will be given to him and to his progeny after him till the end of time. The bris, which means covenant, so we discussed this many times. The Or Chaim HaKodesh had cited the Zohar that the orla, the foreskin, which is the procedure which the bris takes place, that the foreskin must be removed. That is the bris, that is the covenant, the removal of the foreskin. Why was that the covenant? The bris kodesh? So he explains based on the Zohar that Adam, when he was created without a foreskin. It's only as a result of eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which was tov v'ra, good and evil. The evil of that fruit manifested itself, expressed itself by causing the covering of the male organ with the foreskin. The mitzvah of milah, of circumcision, was given to Avram, that as a result of removing that foreskin, it affects and minimizes the evil which had become part of the human function, causing inclination towards evil. By removing that will minimize its effect on the person. By removing that foreskin, because that foreskin is rooted in that ra, in the evil of the Eitz Hadas. So he refers to it as a tikkun. It's a correction in that evil. We're still subject to the inclination, but it doesn't have that overwhelming, controlling over us, and therefore able to function in a more advanced level of capacity, a greater level of control. That is the mitzvah of milah. So therefore it's the bris kodesh. It's the holy covenant, because through that covenant, by removal of that foreskin, we're able to serve God at another level, which would have been impossible without the removal of that foreskin. The Torah tells us that a person who's obligated to remove that foreskin, and he does not, the liability is koris, spiritual excision. Normally, the only time you find the liability of koris, that's only regarding a negative commandment. When you proactively transgress and cross that line. But remaining passive by not doing something, there are only two situations where you have the liability of koris. That's one who's obligated to circumcise himself and does not circumcise himself. And we have the Korban Pesach. On Pesach, a person is able to participate and bring the Paschal lamb and does not. He remains passive. The liability is koris, spiritual excision. It's an impediment for you to have a relation with God. You're excised from Hashem. Understanding what is the value of circumcision. It's the bris kodesh. God gave us this mitzvah to remove the foreskin, because that impediment creates a blockage between us and Hashem. It does not allow the Jew to have that relationship, because since it epitomizes the evil of the Eitz Hadas, which actually took existence down, it changed the whole direction of existence of humanity. Therefore, it's something which has to be removed, otherwise you can't have a relationship with him. Therefore, when the person remains, although it's passive, the non-circumcising oneself, although it's not actively transgressing, the liability, the result of non-circumcision is you have no relationship. Because that impediment doesn't allow for that relationship. Therefore, it has to be removed. And the land of Canaan, which is given to as a gift to Avram and his progeny, that was a prerequisite for that. Rashi in last week's parsha cited the Gemara based on the words of the posuk, Kol ador b'chutz la'aretz ke'ein lo eloka. One who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael as if he has no God. So we explained many times in the name of the Ramban that every location in the world was given to one of the 70 root nations, and every root nation has an archangel. And the relationship and all the energies and sustenance are funneled through that archangel. Eretz Yisrael has no archangel because the Jewish people have no archangel. We have that direct relationship with God. So the flow of energy and all our sustenance comes directly from him. If you live outside of Eretz Yisrael, you're receiving your sustenance through that archangel, that particular archangel of that location. So that's the meaning called Ador v'chutz la'aretz. If you live outside of Eretz Yisrael, ein lo eloka, one doesn't receive it directly from Hashem. It has to come through this intermediary of the archangel of the nation, which particularly resides in that location. But again, Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz HaKadosha. It's the Holy Land. It's Holy Land because, as I said, it's not overseen by an archangel, but rather it's Hashem himself. So to be able to have that relationship with Hashem, which this is Eretz HaKadosha, therefore it's directly linked when you remove that foreskin, which is the Bris Kodesh, the Holy Covenant. The land of Canaan was given to Avram and to his children for all generations till the end of time. There's a Rabbeinu Bachya who writes over here that because the Christians were not circumcised, the land will not tolerate their presence there. And that's why whenever they tried to conquer Eretz Yisrael, they did not succeed because they were uncircumcised, because they had the orlo, they had the foreskin. Arabs, which are partially circumcised, the circumcision of an Arab is not the same as the circumcision of a Jew. The Jew, it's a full removal of that foreskin. The Arab is not. Therefore, he's there only temporarily until the coming of Mashiach. Once Mashiach comes, the Arab will not be able to live there any longer because since it's the ultimate, it's the Holy Land, it's the Eretz HaKadosha, having relevance to that evil of the foreskin, the land will not tolerate his presence. We find the Torah tells us in Parshas Kedoshim, it speaks about the abominable behavior of the Canaanim, the Canaanites, that whatever it was, the sexual perversions, the incest, the adultery, the homosexuality, whatever their behavior was, it says, Vatoki Oretz Osam. The land spit them out. The land, because of its holiness, would not tolerate this level of behavior, and therefore it spit them out. Identically, the Orlo, representing the unadulterated, the most lethal evil, therefore the land does not tolerate that you should be there. Therefore, I'm just coming to explain Rabbeinu Bachya, therefore the Christians cannot be there, the Arabs, which are partially circumcised, until it becomes fully the possession of the Jews, where Hashem will fully reign over that location in the most obvious way, which is after coming Mashiach, the Arab will not be able to be there because of that. This is the understanding. Avram, so there's a famous question which is asked. We read later that Avram fulfilled the whole Torah in its entirety, including rabbinic laws, even before the Torah was given. The Chazal say even Eruv Tavshilin. Ekev asher holach Avram Shabar Avram Bekoli. So it says he fulfilled even Eruvi Tchumin. or Avery Tafshilin, rabbinic laws. Although he was not commanded, it's referred to as Eina B'tzuva. Although he was not commanded, he fulfilled it. So the commentators ask a question: if Avram fulfilled the whole Torah's entirety before it was given, why did he circumcise himself? Before he was commanded to circumcise himself, he should have circumcised himself. Why only that particular mitzvah was he fulfilled only when he was commanded to circumcise himself? So there's a famous word from the Brisker Rov, because the Gemara says, "Godla mitzvah osa yosem shein mitzvah osa." Greater is the person who fulfills the mitzvah when he's commanded to fulfill the mitzvah than when he's not commanded. Since Avram had foreseen through his divine vision that ultimately he will be commanded to circumcise himself, therefore he held off that the mitzvah, when it's done, it should be done at a much more advanced level. Because if he does it at an earlier point, the impact and the effect and the value is not the same. And since he wanted to maximize on that effect of that mitzvah, therefore he waited until he was commanded by Hashem to circumcise himself. But now, it's very interesting. We find that when Avram was circumcised, he had a name change. Until he was circumcised, his name was Avram. When he became circumcised, he became Avraham. Hashem added the letter Hey to his name. We had mentioned many times, we read at the beginning in Parshas Bereshit, this is Bihi Boram. When God created them, when God created existence. So the Midrash says, the letters of Bihi Boram, if you conjugate the letters, it spells Avraham. Avraham. The letters Bihi Boram, and when he created them, referring to existence, they have the same letters as Avraham. So the Maral of Prague explains that Avram Avinu, when he came on the scene, became Avraham. He was, although physically he was part of the original existence, but his dimension of spirituality, in terms of what was represented, was ex nihilo. It never existed. That level of spirituality did not pre-exist Avram. It was an ex nihilo. So therefore, Avraham is Bihi Baram. He's the equivalent of a new creation. And especially, it's good because the Gemara tells us the spirituality of which letter did God create the world? With the spirituality of the letter Hey. Which the letter Hey, existence came into existence. And the Midrash says, just as I brought all existence into existence through the spirituality, letter Hey, for you to be able to father a child, I will add that Hey to your name, because you yourself are the equivalent of the beginning of a new existence. What was needed to create this new dimension of existence was no less than was needed to create all existence. For Avram to become this new being, known as the founding father of the Jewish people, which came through Yitzchak, being his son, being the future patriarch of Klal Yisrael. So the whole idea of Sori Menu, not being able to conceive, the problem was not with her. Although she took Hagar and they'd given Hagar to Avram, she felt it was futile. She wasn't going to have the child because there was no stone she left unturned to determine whether maybe there was some kind of spiritual shortcoming in her that she was not worthy to be the matriarch. And therefore, she was willing, she says, I will build through my maidservant. Because maybe I'm lacking humility. Maybe I don't see some kind of spiritual shortcoming in myself, which I have to correct. It had nothing to do with her. Because Yitzchak is the second patriarch. The patriarch has to be fathered by a patriarch. Avram did not take on the patriarchal persona or reality until he became that new being. That new being came about when the letter Hey was added to his name. When he became Avram, it was the beginning of a new creation. And that's the reason why, until then, he couldn't father that child from Sorah, because the patriarch of Klal Yisrael comes from Sorah, not from Hagar. Yishmael is an ordinary person, part of that original creation. Yitzchak is not part of that original creation. He's the beginning of a new creation. It's an existence which didn't pre-exist himself. And therefore, the Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us, Kol hamatzil nefesh achas mi Yisrael, kilu hitzilo lamolei. If you save the life of one Jew, it's like saving the life of all existence. Olamolei, one Jew is a world unto himself. Why? Why is he different than anyone else? A whole world. The answer is because the Jew himself is not the same world as the Gentile. It's a different reality. It's a different existence. And therefore, how did the covenant come about to create that new reality and status? It was the removal of that foreskin. And this was the beginning of the process of the evolution of Atem Kriyim Adam, Him Lo Kriyim Adam. You ultimately will assume the position of Adam, of Adam before the sin, which culminated with what? With the receiving of Torah at Sinai.